Session is dedicated to the international aspect of gambling harms and also to the interdisciplinary aspect of gambling harms, which is where we're going to finish our day. We've got a great panel who are each going to speak for 10 minutes. We're going to start with Ben Hayden. Ben is the Director of Research and Statistics at the Gambling Commission, which is the UK regulator. And importantly for this session, Ben's also President of the International Association of Gaming Regulators. And he's going to talk to us about building the evidence base, a UK and international view. Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Agnes, and good afternoon. So I'm here today because I passionately believe that it is only through learning from each other's experience that we genuinely move issues and challenges on. And, well, what can I offer you in the sort of next 10 minutes? Why would you bother listening to me? Well, as Agnes says, I'm a director at the Gambling Commission, and we are involved in regulating one of the sort of larger and maturer markets around the world. But I think more importantly for me, I think we really do take building our evidence base seriously. And I think within my team, we are very fortunate that at the moment there is a focus on that as we move forward from here. And then the other aspect is that I'm very lucky to be president of IARGA. My family is thrilled that I get to travel to bits of the world and spend quite a bit of time away from them. And I'm never sure whether they sort of wave me off happily and sort of wave me back, hopefully laden with presents for having time away, or whether they genuinely miss me. But there we go. I'm very fortunate because I get to speak to a lot of people from either mature markets or from markets that are opening up, or markets that have been sort of going for about a year or so. And you genuinely start to see similar challenges, but different approaches, and you start to learn because someone always comes at it with a fresh perspective. So whether that's really appreciating the impact of mobile in somewhere, say, like Africa, where it's very different to here, or whether it's looking through the lens of advertising as they do in Australia, or whether it's looking at how they deal with sports integrity like they do in the US. It genuinely is different, but it is all connected. So I want to give these two perspectives, and as I say, sometimes they're aligned and sometimes they're not, and that's usually for very good reasons. But I'll start with the UK sort of point of view, and I'll start with sort of what we want to know. So clearly, as a regulator, evidence matters. We all make decisions based on what we understand about the world around us and what the evidence is telling us. And the bigger the decision and the wider its impact, the more we probably want to know. Now, it's a bit of a mantra at the GC, but that thing is that we kind of recognise that better data, better research, and better evidence will lead to better gambling regulation and better outcomes for consumers who gamble, their communities, and the gambling sector itself. And I think that's what makes identifying some of the gaps and priorities for further data and research so important. Now, we've identified 6 themes, which, whilst we already have some evidence and data, we think are a priority to make a concerted effort to try and strengthen that evidence base. Now, we published this about a year and a half ago. We provided an update after a year, and we'll continue to engage around this framework. But those areas are early gambling experiences and gateway products, the range and variability of gambling experiences, gambling-related harms and vulnerability, the impact of operator practices, product characteristics and risk, and illegal gambling and crime. Now, I think if we can all get to understand everything that we need to know around that, we would have a particularly strong evidence base indeed. And I think one of the points that I would want to make is that it's not, while this is something that is very GC-centric, so clearly it comes at it from a regulator point of view, it's not something that we alone can deliver. And there are lots of people in this room who will help add to that particular evidence base. And I can see that from the conversations that we've had in the room today, and I can see it from the posters that I've seen around the room today. But I do think that it's important to have a good frame to work within, because that enables us to monitor properly how that evidence base is building, and we can better demonstrate, therefore, the impact that we're having. So for us, it was a really seminal piece of work to put this gaps and priorities together. I wanted then to just reflect a little bit on the ecosystem that delivers the building of an evidence base. And I think that's changing quite rapidly at the moment. So if I was to look back over my career, I've been around gambling regulation for a bit. So if I was to look back, I think there was some quite sort of straightforward, there's a quite straightforward ecosystem. There's sort of regulator, there's industry, there's academics, there's government, and so on. But I think that's really changing now because of some of the stuff that you've heard, the blurring, etc. So we now talk to international regulators a lot more. We now talk to adjacent regulators within the UK a lot more. And we now talk to sectors that weren't perhaps the sort of traditional ones that we did. So we talk to banks, a lot more. And I think this is really because we're driving now to where the sources of data are that we need to be able to understand some of those questions that I was just talking about. So we need to go where the data is, and that probably isn't the traditional spots, or not always the traditional spots. And I think it's also changing this ecosystem, this evidence ecosystem, because of these sorts of factors. So first of all, something you'll hear from government quite a lot now is radical transparency. And I think that is because consumers expect to understand what is being done with their data and to be part of that sort of data gathering exercise. There's a great poster over there around data donation. We're going to see an awful lot more of that, aren't we, over the next sort of 2 to 3 years. So there's a frame that's changing there. There's a frame that's going to change around data access. So hopefully in sort of 2 to 3 years' time, people who have an interest in gambling research will be able to access a much richer data source than they can now. And then clearly there's the importance of the interdisciplinary perspective. And just again, going around those posters around the room, you can see different methodologies, different approaches being taken to answer questions that have been around for a long time, but now we're looking at them through fresh lens. And I think that's super important. So what are we doing in terms of the GC to try and deliver against this? Well, in particular, we are trying to improve the quality of our data sets. So we've put this gaps and priorities frame in place. We're looking to build some roadmaps to encourage people to understand better where we think some of the milestones along the way to that are. And we're improving our data sets. So we want to know more about what the consumer says about their gambling. So we've recently launched the Gambling Survey for Great Britain, which you'll have seen the first full publication in the summer. But we also have our consumer voice research. We do a lot with regard to children and young people. And we have a lived experience advisory panel at the Commission, which helps start to bring that voice of the consumer centrally into our work. We're looking to get more detailed data from operators, so more transactional data. We need to be able to see what people do as well as what they say. And we're looking to set it in the wider context. So you'll see one of the posters is from one of my colleagues around the broader context that looking at open banking data gives you. So there's an awful lot there. Now I need to move on very quickly because I've had the 2-minute warning with regard to the international bit. And I think I'll try and sort of boil this down a little bit. But I think with all international matters, there's more that binds us together than separates us, right? That is a sort of a truism, for sure. But that said, I don't think we should ever fall into the trap as researchers in terms of imagining that kind of what we do here is exactly the same as what someone else might do in a different country. If we get lost in expecting it to be the same, we'll lose its value. So I think you see some of those differences being driven by the maturity of a jurisdiction. Policies develop at different paces for different reasons in different ways. In terms of culture, so how gambling is viewed in a country, whether through religion or social perspective, means that it's rare that two jurisdictions are the same. If you look at the US, it's a patchwork quilt of what you should do and what you shouldn't do, depending upon which side of the state line you're at. And then there's also the point around terminology. Is it gaming? Is it gambling? Is it responsible gambling? Is it safer gambling? My reflection here is just that terminologies change. And I think we just need to be open to having those discussions and engaging on it. Detail matters, but it will change. And I suppose finally that regardless though of the importance of transparent and robust approaches holds true wherever you are. Now in Brazil recently, you may have seen that there was one report from the Brazilian Central Bank that said there was $6 billion, US dollars, being gambled by Brazilians in currently the unregulated market. And then another report came out last week from the Brazilian Institute of Responsible Gambling, which said it was half that number. So it's quite difficult, isn't it, when there's all these other numbers around. And how matters are put prompts other thoughts. And this picks up a little bit on what Philip was saying earlier. And when I started thinking about this presentation, I was thinking about how to build the evidence base from a breadth and depth point of view. But actually, I think it's probably more important to think about, and the hardest thing is not to build the evidence base, but to have it understood, accepted, and used universally with all its strengths and limitations in mind. So we need to think as an evidence ecosystem about whether we spend enough time on the discussion and the communication of what we do rather than simply doing more research and building that base up. So days like today, I think, are very helpful from that point of view, but I guess my challenge to all of us is simply that we should do more. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ben. That was a great way to kick things off, and interesting to talk about, you know, what are the commonalities and what are the differences between different jurisdictions, as well as how we communicate sometimes those differences and similarities. We move seamlessly now on to Andrea Sacco. Andrea is a researcher and a research manager at the Centre for Responsible Gaming at the University of Gibraltar. And she's going to be sharing with us findings from a study on exploring the public perception of gambling and gambling disorder across a range of different countries, which should be fascinating.
Thank you very much. And first of all, thank you for letting me be here and share some snapshots from our recent research. This was a part of a bigger comprehensive research project, and the aim was focusing on the stigmatization of gambling and the relationship with gambling-related harms. And first of all, I would like to thanks for the Bristol Hub for Gambling Harms Research for its support, and also for the many researchers and collaborators who were working on this research project. So stigmatization has been widely studied in various contexts, including mental health disorder and substance use disorders. And it has been shown that it has a very negative impact on people's mental health, their quality of life, and also it is a very significant barrier for help seeking. However, research on the stigmatization of gambling is a relatively new topic. There are research projects now focusing on this topic, but not a lot, and most of them focus or have been focusing on the Australian and the North American contexts. Very few studies have been conducted in Europe and in other parts of the world. So therefore, we were investigating. We were interested in investigating the general perception of gambling, people who gamble and people who live with gambling disorder, focusing on the UK and 6 other countries, Kenya, Poland, Canada, Australia, Hungary, Italy, and we also had a small sample from Switzerland. In the following, I would like to show you a few, 5 to be more precise, snapshots from our preliminary results. What I will show you will be based on our UK data, but I will also shortly reflect on the cross-country differences that we found. So from the UK, we had a proportionate sample in terms of gender, age, and ethnicity of 1,400 people, while from the 6 other countries we had 6,500 participants in this research project. And before I start, I would like to I would like to give a short warning. So this is a very sensitive topic, and what we found is, to put it this way, is not very favorable, but I do believe that it's a very important topic. It has very serious consequences, and we need to investigate this topic to be able to acknowledge the fact that stigmatization exists, and also to be able to tackle the consequences. So the 5 snapshots that I promised. So first of all, we examined the social distancing. We wanted to see gambling in a context, so we asked the respondents to tell us how likely they would be open to a friendship with people with different conditions, and we listed different groups that are or can be stigmatized in various contexts. And what we saw in our results is that what you can see here is the percentage of rejections regarding these different groups. And what we found that there is a very widespread avoidance of people who have substance use disorder across all the countries, and the next most rejected group of people were those with gambling disorder. Although we also saw that there was a clear distinction, these yellow bars that you can see on this chart, according to the severity of gambling or the frequency of gambling behavior. So while people with a gambling disorder were very highly rejected, those who gamble frequently were less rejected, and those who gamble occasionally were accepted by the majority of the people. What we saw in an international context is that the group of people with substance use disorder were the most rejected people across all the countries. However, the level of rejection varied across the investigated countries. In Kenya, what we found is that the rejection for all groups was lower, while, for example, in Italy and Switzerland showed a stronger distancing tendencies. The second topic that we investigated, and I don't have a slide for that, was how much gambling disorder in comparison with other mental health issues is recognized as a mental health condition. So we asked people how much they believed that different conditions can be considered as mental health disorders, and what we found is that there is a strong recognition that depression, schizophrenia, and bipolar disorder are mental health conditions. Around 90% of our respondents agreed with this statement. However, when it comes to addictive disorders, including substance use disorder, alcohol use disorder, and also gambling disorder, this decreased to around 2/3 of the respondents. We saw differences in the percentages across the countries. In Kenya, it was the lowest, around about 46%, while in Australia and Italy, 70-80% of the respondents agreed with gambling disorder being a mental health issue. The UK was somewhere in the middle with 56%. And why this is important, what we also found is that those who consider gambling disorder to be a mental health condition, they were more open to befriend someone experiencing gambling harms. Thirdly, we wanted to investigate the subjective perception of people who gamble frequently. And for this, we use a semantic differential scale, a set of polar adjective pairs, and ask people to decide on which side of these pairs someone who gambles frequently would be found. And what we found is that in the dimensions of strength and responsibility, the evaluation tended to be more negative. So people gambling frequently were tended to be seen as irresponsible and undisciplined, and also unreliable. However, when it came to the dimensions of friendliness and intellectual abilities and benevolence, we saw that it was a more neutral evaluation of people who gamble frequently. We also wanted to see what people believe to be the causes, the background factors of gambling disorder. We offered a list of possible causes and asked how much they believe that these can contribute to gambling harms. And what we saw is that there was a consensus across most of the countries that it is driven by, on one hand, the addictive nature of the games and easy access to gambling, and on the other hand, personality factors and the lack of willpower. Basically, what we saw that it is seen that people who gamble and the gambling companies are more or less share the same amount of responsibility for the development of gambling disorder. However, here we also saw some cross-country differences. Environmental factors, the influence of peers and financial difficulties were listed in Kenya as important contributing factors, while in Italy, family background and upbringing was considered to be the most important cause. And finally, in relation to this, we asked what people thought about who would be responsible for the treatment and prevention and for tackling gambling harms. And across all countries, what we saw that it was mostly the person who gambles who is responsible, and secondly, the gambling companies, the operators, which was followed by the state or the government, but in a bit lesser extent. While the role of families, educational institutions, healthcare system was not seen that central. So summarizing, because I received the warning, it's good that there is a recognition of the role of the industry and the nature of the games when it comes to the development of harms. I hope that it signals an increasing tendency, but obviously we don't have longitudinal data to see how this changes over time. However, there is a tendency for social distancing and for negative stereotyping, and also a tendency to believe that those who experience gambling harms are responsible for this. And this is partly, believe, is because of not understanding the complexity of the reasons behind gambling harms and the nature of gambling disorder. So what we believe is that these results call for, on the one hand, further research in the area to understand more the background factors behind stigmatization, but also further initiatives. I know that there are already some existing that aim to raise the awareness and decrease the stigmatization surrounding gambling harms. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrea. They were quite stark and shocking figures. Thank you for warning us. And fascinating to see the differences in the discourses that seem to be being propounded in different countries. I do hope you manage to do this on a longitudinal basis, because it would be really interesting to see how those perceptions change, maybe with the implementation of different regulations. So thank you. It was absolutely fascinating. Next, we turn to Dr. Selma Lilongo. Selma is a senior librarian for scholarly communication and also a lecturer in health research methods at the University of Namibia. She's just finished a fascinating piece of research, which she's going to talk about, and it's about the impact of gambling information diffusion on the behaviour of people who gamble. So, would you mind passing that over, please?
Yes.
Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Selma Ilonga, just to confirm that's my name. Okay, from the University of Namibia, and my studies on the impact of gambling information divisions on consumers' behavior in Namibia. This is a big study that has two parts: the social aspect part, social science aspect part, and the mathematical aspect part or science aspect part, because it has a student who is doing a master in mathematical modeling in consumers on the impacts of gambling information division on consumers' behaviors in Namibia by doing the modeling part. So firstly, I want to thank the Gambling Hub of the University of Bristol for this opportunity for us as junior researchers, and also for our country, because this is one of this kind study of in Namibia, and it has attracted so much support and attention from the government and the level stakeholders in Namibia. Okay, for the introduction, Namibia have legalized gambling practices with different regulatory system: the Casino and Gambling House Act 32 of 1994, Lottery Act number 13 of 2017, and Gambling Entertainment Act number 13 of 2018, which put restriction on the certain types of advertisement on section 48 and subsection 1, and also subsection 2A that regulate for the advertisement and notice statement warning against the dangers of addictive and compulsive gambling to be placed in and around gambling houses, but that's actually not there. Okay, however, this Gambling Entertainment Act of 2018 only came in force on the 1st December 2021. And currently, there are more gambling activities everywhere in Namibia, despite the commencement of this act in 2021, and despite the implementation of SDG 3 to ensure health lives and promote well-being in all age. So our study was conducted with the 1,602 gamblers that participate in the study from the 4 regions of Namibia: Oshana, Zambezi, Commerce, and Erongo, from February to June this year. And this findings found that 47% of participants who are young gamblers from the ages 25 to 34, and followed by 23% of young gambler, again 35 to 34 age, and followed by the 19% of participants who are 15 and 24 age, very young indeed, but they are in gambling houses and betting, and 7% for 45 to 54 age, 3% 55 to 64, and 1% our senior citizens. And we found that more male are more into gambling than female. And in terms of marital status, single people are also more into gambling plays, followed by married with children and separated, and also those married with children, with no children, divorced, and prefer not to say it, as indicated in the paragraph. And in terms of motivating factors or exposures that influencing gambling activity in Namibia, we find that the majority, the highest 40%, are influenced by the gambling information that is shared through word of mouth, followed by gambling art or images, radios, television, internet, and 16% that's more on, 14% that is of information on billboard and gambling, betting, and betting house. And the 13% gambling message shared through cell phone, WhatsApp, 11% gambling availability and accessibility of gambling facility and houses, and the others on printed materials, leaflet. And also to just validate what they're saying as a word of mouth, he said, I heard about it from friends saying that people are betting and winning a lot of money while you are at home. And then this one is saying, first had gambling information via local radio, just to say the few from the list. And in terms of reason for gambling, because you can be exposed, but if you don't have a reason to be involved in it, you cannot be participating in it. So major reasons participating in gambling is to win money with the 48%, followed by for fun, entertainment, competitions, and to keep bottom, for social interactions, for stress relief, and the others. Others include because they have debt, influence from other gamblers or friends, access to gambling houses, impression from previous winners, and also the unemployment. This word cloud from Atos TI is just to demonstrate that money was indeed one of the major indicator or the major factors or dimensions on gambling. This also supported with the interview, which showed that there was no food at home, the money was gone. I felt very bad. You know, this is the reason I keep coming hoping to win more money. And it also says stress. People deal with it differently, and I stated because I needed money, I'm unemployed. Okay, the different types of gambling information advertisement messages spread in gambling or around gambling places, as the first pictures involve, stand a chance to be a millionaire. So that's one of them. And then win 250,000, win just more figures of more monies that are displayed in gambling and around gambling building. This is what's attracting people to become or to get involved in gambling activities. And also these that are also some of the messages that are included: come play and win, bingo, winning is unlimited, play smart, win big, and all the rest. And also these ATM banking machines in ATM, in gambling bettings and gambling house. It's also one of the messages that might not be seen as a message, but it's a message that is attracting people to gamble or to gambling harm. And also the physical availability and accessibility of betting houses because we found that gambling houses are more placed or located closer to the people, to the residential. And this is the message, actually the only message that we found that is found is more controlling or mitigating gambling in gambling, that said, are you feeling trapped by your gambling habit? If your gambling is all you think about, are you spending more time at the casino than your family, even if you just suspect that gambling might be a problem for yourself or for someone you know? Don't wait, call the Responsible Gambling Program helpline. This is actually a responsible gambling program for South Africa, and I believe this gambling is also maybe owned by South African in Namibia. Okay, and this is the impacts that most advertisement have. Most of the participants indicated that the message is actually impacting them, causing them to become more involved in gambling activity. As is indicated here when you say GSB Sport Betting has this message that say hit the jackpot, and then it shows previous win like millions, 100,000. And this is also one of the impact on life-changing impact of gambling. The majority of participants have indicated that through gambling, they have more money. Like in that one, they have disagree with that statement, and they have also disagree with gambling give me peace of mind, and they have also disagree with what gambling gave me a better person, but they have agreed that they save part of the money that they win from gambling. COVID observation has indicated that the impact of gambling is actually beyond what we have seen or what we mostly read. Heavy consumption of alcohol and smoking after gamblers have lost money in gambling activity. Most betting and gambling outlets have alcohol bar section. Gamblers get frustrated as shaking their heads and go outside for smoking after losing, a sign of mental distress. And then financial mismanagement, whereby gamblers keep withdrawing money after losing, since there are ATM located inside gambling and betting houses. Gamblers' resistance to seeking help is also one of the impacts, because most of the gamblers have indicated that they don't want to stop gambling, with a simple saying, "I told you I am a man, no counseling here, I can handle it." I believe gambling is not really good, but it is a person's choice to participate. Support system and coping mechanisms. Participants have indicated that if their message encouraging people to stop gambling or to gamble responsibly, they will comply. If they have gambling problems, they are also willing to get help. And they also showed that they don't know if any public health information targeting those with gambling problem. And they are aware of negative consequences of gambling, but they cannot stop on their own, as indicated there. So in conclusion, there is a need for enforcement of the existing law and amendment to enhance the protection of gamblers. The need for a public awareness and sensitization of danger of gambling habits to reduce harm. And we also need further research, more research to be conducted on gambling harm in Namibia to identify gaps that were not addressed by this study. I think my time is up. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Selma. That was a huge and rich study, and the very first of its kind in Namibia. So congratulations on being a real groundbreaker. It was a fascinating study. We're now going to, we've had an international field. We're now going to turn to the issue of interdisciplinarity. And a few people Ben picked that up, the fact that there are lots of different methods looking at gambling harms research coming from lots of different disciplines. And that's part of our mission here, is to build capacity across interdisciplinarity. So we're delighted to have Professor Kate Bedford here, who is an interdisciplinary researcher with a background in law and political economy. And she's going to talk to us about why we need more interdisciplinarity on our research in gambling harms. Thank you, Kate.
Thanks so much. I feel a little bit like this might be the least necessary part of the conversation here today, given the audience and the amazing posters and presentations, but so I'll keep it brief. I'll just make 2 points. One general one about the need for a wider disciplinary lens on research into gambling, and one more specific one about what I think a more critical lens on law can concretely add to research on gambling harms. And so the remarks I'm going to make are ones that Fiona Nicol and I have jointly developed. So Fiona is a professor of politics at the University of Alberta in Canada. And I work in a law school at the University of Birmingham. Fiona and I individually have several decades of experience researching different types of gambling in many different jurisdictions. We also work together as part of the open access journal Critical Gambling Studies. So that journal was founded by Fiona in 2019, and it's now co-edited by Fiona, myself, and Dr. Emma Casey, who's a sociologist at the University of York. So the Critical Gambling Studies journal involved both a diagnosis of a problem in gambling research and an attempted solution. So a key aim of the journal was to create a genuinely interdisciplinary and independent publication outlet, free of industry influence. Lack of a platform like that was something that many people had identified as a problem in years past, but it didn't seem to have been solved. So in 2021, Fiona led a study into the disciplinary shape of gambling research. So one thing that she did was to look with a team of researchers at top cited publications on gambling in 2 academic databases that are widely used to gather evidence together across disciplines and across countries. And those databases were the Web of Science and Scopus. So out of that came 10 top journals for where gambling research is published. 8 of the 10 self-described as either health, psychiatry, or neurosciences. The remaining 2, both gambling-specific journals, self-described as interdisciplinary, but the majority of their contributions were from researchers working in the sciences disciplines, and the editors and editorial board members are largely based in the sciences. So this pie graph gives another view of the disciplinary shape of gambling research, and this figure represents a study of papers, academic research papers in 5 countries that cited work by the top 10 cited authors in gambling studies. And I can go over that at the end if that's confusing, but there's a reference to the paper in the slide which I can happily share with you. So the graph essentially shows the disciplines of first authors in that 5-country citation study. And I think it's a nice visual representation of the disciplinary shape and perhaps narrowness of a lot of research in gambling studies. Is that a problem? So normally when I ask that question in a gambling conference environment, I'm the 2% in a room of the 98, and I might have some scowling faces. It's a really different environment today, which I think is a real credit and testimony to the environment that's been built by the Hub. So it's not as risky for me to venture today the answer, which is that yes, this is a problem. And I want to just give a really concrete example of why this might be a problem and what other lenses we might bring to bear on gambling research to help alleviate the problem. So I want to talk about a concrete example about research into law and regulation. So as many of you know and you've heard today, we're in the midst of debates in the UK about what legal changes are required to reduce gambling harms. But we don't have a very robust understanding of what legal interventions work best to tackle gambling harms and what the effects of legal interventions that have been introduced here or in other jurisdictions with a public health lens in mind, so aiming to reduce gambling harms, what the effects of those interventions have been. So I can say that we don't have very robust evidence base on that quite confidently because I'm co-leading an NIHR grant with a public health academic that is designed to develop an equitable public health approach to regulating gambling harm. And so one of our work packages is a systematic review of evidence on the effects of legal interventions intended to reduce gambling harm. And the evidence base on the effects of hard laws is comparatively thin when we measure it against, for example, studies of the effects of responsible gambling messaging or different therapeutic treatments or different drug treatments. Not to say that there's not enormous value in research in those other areas, but the evidence base around the effects of legal interventions is relatively thin by comparison. So when I say that, I don't mean there's no research on gambling law and regulation. Not at all. There's a lot. A lot of it is practice-oriented publications, describing legislation, describing regulations, summarizing recent legal cases. A lot of it is advising gambling companies about how to comply with those regulations or helping gambling companies to lobby for legal changes that will benefit those gambling companies, including legal changes around game definition, in subsidiary products, often around bingos and lotteries, for example, something I'm very interested in, something that would be a really wise idea to focus a lot more attention on, I think. In fact, sometimes research on gambling law and regulation can involve some quite serious conflict of interest concerns, and legal academics could learn a lot from public health academics there around disclosures of conflicts of interest. There is, of course, more independent work on gambling law and regulation on which we can build. And I'm happy to give some examples. I don't want to take too much time from the discussion. But we need more of that. We also need, I think, to listen to a much broader range of experts about the impacts of law and regulation on gambling harm. And to give you an example of what I mean, this brings me to my photo. I'm going to take you back a few years to 2016, 2017. Gambling Commission guidance to premises-based operators around encouraging account-based play as a social responsibility measure. And the preference for account-based play was in part about money laundering fears, and that remains a concern with cash use. But it was also believed that players could be better protected if their play was trackable. Not coincidentally, moving players off cash onto account-based play was also popular with some parts of the gambling industry. Account-based players can be targeted for marketing very effectively, and account-based play is typically faster. So you can introduce more automation into the play. So at that time, 2016, 2017, I was doing a large multi-jurisdiction study on the regulation of charitable and commercial bingo. It was very clear to me that cash was a harm reduction strategy in bingo venues. The demographics most attached to bingo, older working class women in the UK, indigenous people in Canada, were far more likely to use cash than other groups in society. They were also using cash to help limit their spending. So this photo is taken from a bingo hall in the south of England, shows what is a quite typical way of playing side games in a UK bingo hall. People would come with a note, exchange it for cash, put the coins into the side games in the interval between the main bingo session. Once the coins were used, they were not topped up. So I was concerned that the guidance about moving players off cash as a social responsibility mechanism might not work well for this demographic. In fact, it might potentially make things worse. While supporting a narrative of account-based play that was of benefit to certain portions of the gambling industry. Fast forward to 2024, and I'll end it here, you can see that those concerns made absolutely no difference whatsoever to the direction of regulatory travel. The harm reduction potential of player tracking for online gambling is being enthusiastically embraced in the UK by a very wide range of actors in public health, in very critical law and regulation as well, in computer sciences, but among some communities of lived experience experts. Also embraced by some consumer surveillance businesses with vested interests in RegTech, regulation technologies, as a solution to harm. So those include for-profit safer gambling technology companies and for-profit credit reference agencies. If we're interested in robust interdisciplinary evidence on the most effective legal interventions for tackling gambling harm, I think that we need to include a wider range of people in that conversation. And I very much agree with the point that was made earlier about that this isn't just a matter of gathering more data, it's a matter of creating spaces to discuss the different sorts of findings that are coming out from that sort of data. And that's why environments like this are so important.